Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're trying a Commander's Guild deck tech. So for the past 5 months or so, I've been taking a random card from scryfall.com every single week and turning it into a commander deck for Magic the Gathering. Now, normally this is a completely random card. This week was a request from Reddit user iExtravagant, when we'll get to that in a minute. But the main idea of what we're doing is we are taking a random card from Scryfall, we are taking a budget of $100, and we are building a commander deck that must work around the theme of the chosen card. So this week, our randomly chosen card was Imminent Doom, which is only about 14 cents, so it's an interesting card. It's 2 and 1 red for an enchantment, and when it enters the battlefield, it has a Doom counter on it. And whenever you cast a spell with converted mana cost equal to the number of Doom counters on Imminent Doom deals that much damage to target creature or player. Then put a Doom counter on Imminent Doom. So, a very weird card, but we found a couple of ways to make it work. So some of the themes of this deck are going to revolve around the commander being enchantments. So we chose Gen Arcanum Weaver as the commander, and he is able to sacrifice an enchantment by paying red, white, black, and tapping him, and returning target enchantment card from our graveyard to the battlefield, and he is a 2/3 human wizard. So if Imminent Doom is ever destroyed, or someone puts it into our graveyard by milling it, we are able to use our commander to get it back. A little bit of safety net for our Imminent Doom. He also could sacrifice our Imminent Doom if it has too many counters on it, so that we can reset the count at 1 and try it again. Some of the other themes we put into this deck were flickering, or the idea of exiling Imminent Doom and bringing it back to the battlefield, again, as a way to reset some of the counters on it. We can restart at number 1 and try it again. The other themes involve the counters that are going to be on Imminent Doom. So Power Conduit can remove a counter from a permanent, which Imminent Doom is not the only card we have with counters. We also have plenty of sagas and creatures with 1/1 counters. So being able to manipulate those counters, going down to maybe make it a little easier to activate Imminent Doom. And then our main theme to go along with Gen is enchantments. We have plenty of cards that say when an enchantment enters the battlefield, or they care about how many enchantments you have on the board. All of that kind of stuff. So most of our cards are going to deal with that. Some of the key cards in this deck, though, obviously we can't talk key cards without talking Imminent Doom. That is the card in the deck. That's really the only way we want to win the game. It's not the only way we can win the game, but it's the only fun way to. We also have cards that deal double damage. So, Obosh the Prey Piercer says that if a source we control with an odd converted mana cost would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage instead. Imminent Doom happens to be odd. So if we do 1 damage with Obosh on board, it's actually 2, and then 2 becomes 4, and 3 becomes 6. And Obosh is not the only damage doubler we have. We also have Dictate of the Twin Gods, and we have Furnace of Wrath, meaning we could, if we're lucky enough, turn 1 damage into 2, into 4, into 8, just from having those 3 cards on board. Personally, I think this is probably going to be our best bet to get damage out of this, but we will see. The next main key card in here is something like Hex Parasite. It is a threat, and it's able to remove as many counters from something that we want it to. So we can pay X and a Phyrexian black, which means we can pay a black mana or 2 life, and we can remove X counters from target permanent, and for each counter removed, Hex Parasite gets +1/+0. Now this doesn't have to be our things. If an opponent has a Planeswalker that we need to get rid of, we can just take the counters off of it. We can take counters off of our opponent's creatures. It's a very versatile card in this deck. At this point, I'd like to point out some cool interactions I found while building this deck that kind of helped put the whole thing together. The first one being our commander, Gen, and a card called Delaying Shield. Now, Delaying Shield says if you would be dealt damage, put that many delay counters on Delaying Shield instead, and at the beginning of your upkeep, remove all delay counters from Delaying Shield, and for each delay counter removed this way, you lose 1 life unless you pay 2 mana. But with Gen, we can actually sacrifice the Delaying Shield before we get to our upkeep, meaning we never have to worry about taking the damage. This leaves us capable of pretty much preventing all damage to us as long as we're able to keep this interaction going. Another cool interaction is one between Mesa Enchantress, which says whenever you cast an enchantment spell you may draw a card, and the card Crown of Flames, which gives enchanted creature +1/+0 for a single red mana, or for a single red mana can return to its owner's hand. That means that for 2 red mana, we can basically just draw a card whenever we want, as long as Mesa Enchantress is on the board. Now, I mentioned price earlier. Since this deck is built on a budget of $100 or less, this one came out to $93 at the time I am recording this. And the most expensive card in the deck, actually, is Authority of the Consuls, a 1 mana enchantment that says creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you gain 1 life. That's currently sitting at $6.84. Now, you could very easily cut this card from the deck if you're looking to trim down on some cost, but it is very useful. Being a 1 mana card helps us start our Imminent Doom. It helps us gain life to try to stay alive. It's an early sacrifice outlet for Gen if you need to get something bigger out of your graveyard. All in all, pretty much an all-star in this deck, but definitely not necessary by any means. So, with all of that out of the way, we are going to get into a bit of gameplay. So, I recorded 1 game, and we are going to face off against Ranar the Ever-Watchful, Anawan the Ruin Thief, and Aura Skyclave Hierophant, played by 3 of my personal friends, Ranar being played by Bilal, Anawan being played by Jason, and Aura being played by Sean. So we will jump into that game, and I will let you know how the game goes, and once it's over, we'll have a quick wrap-up, and I'll talk about anything that might need to be improved about this deck. So I will see you guys in the game. So at the start of the game, Bilal goes first, plays a Fabled Passage, and cracks it for an island, and then passes to Sean. Sean plays a Concealed Courtyard and passes. Jason plays a Temple of Deceit, scrying to the top, and then passing. I play a Path of Ancestry tapped, and pass. Bilal plays a Plains and passes. Sean plays a High Market, casts Lightning Greaves, and passes. Jason plays an Island, casts a Mask of Memory, and then passes. I play a Command Tower, and pass. Bilal plays a Sky Cloud Expanse and passes. Sean plays a Swamp, then casts Doomed Necromancer, equips Doomed Necromancer with Lightning Greaves, and decides to attack Bilal. And then he passes. Jason misses his 3rd land drop and passes. I play a Plains, cast Gen, and I scry to the bottom with Path of Ancestry, and then I pass to Bilal. Bilal plays a Plains, casts Ranar, foretells a card for free and makes a spirit with Ranar's ability. He then passes to Sean. Sean misses his 4th land drop. Casts a High Priest of Penance. And then at the end of turn, Jason casts Soaring Thought Thief. Jason equips the Mask of Memory to Soaring Thought Thief and attacks me. On the attack, each player mills 2 cards. When he does damage, Jason draws 2 cards and discards 1 thanks to the Mask of Memory. And in his second main phase, plays an island. I untap, play a swamp, cast a Johnny's Chosen, and then move to combat. And I attack Jason with Gen, and then pass. Bilal plays a Tranquil Cove, gaining 1 life. Foretells a card for free and makes another spirit with Ranar. He then moves to combat and attacks Sean with Ranar and me with a spirit. I also finally decide to get rid of that annoying pop-up on the side there. Sean, again, misses a land, but he does cast Remorseful Cleric. He equips the High Priest of Penance with Lightning Greaves, and then passes. Jason untaps, draws, and then goes right to combat, attacking me with Soaring Thought Thief. On the attack, we all mill 2, and then when Jason's creature does damage, he draws 2 and discards 1. He then plays a Dreadship Reef. Jason then casts an Enigma Thief for its Prowl cost, since he did damage with a rogue this turn. And this allows him to return 1 creature for each of his opponents to their owner's hands. He chooses my Ajani's Chosen, chooses Sean's High Priest of Penance, and chooses one of Bilal's Spirit tokens. Note, the High Priest of Penance did have Lightning Greaves on it, so this should not have happened, but unfortunately we don't catch it. On my turn, I play an Evolving Wilds, recast Ajani's Chosen, and crack the Evolving Wilds for a Plains, passing to Bilal. Bilal plays an island, casts Burnished Heart, and then moves to combat. He sends 2 at me with Ranar, and then passes to Sean. Sean untaps, plays a Tainted Field, and casts Aura from the command zone. He equips Lightning Greaves onto Aura, and then passes. Jason untaps, draws, and moves to combat. This time he attacks Sean with the Soaring Thought Thief. On the attack, we all mill 2. Sean will block with his Remorseful Cleric, but sacrifice it to exile Bilal's graveyard before the damage. This will also trigger Aura, getting Soul Warden back from the graveyard to the battlefield. In his second main phase, Jason will foretell a card, and as a note, from here on out, every time the Soul Warden is on the battlefield, every time a creature enters, Sean will gain 1 life. I play a mountain and cast a Furnace of Wrath. Unfortunately, it gets countered by Jason with a Counter Squall. And at the end of my turn, Bilal cracks the Burnished Heart to go search for an island and a plains to put onto the battlefield. At the start of Bilal's turn, he untaps, draws a card, and plays a Glacial Floodplain as his land for turn. And then he passes to Sean, leaving all his mana untapped. Sean plays a Malakir Mire as his land for turn, and casts a Selfless Spirit, and then a High Priest of Penance, passing to Jason. Jason untaps, moves straight to combat, and attacks me for 2 with Soaring Thought Thief. On the attack, we all mill 2. Jason draws 2 and discards 1 card when it does damage. In his second main phase, he plays a Swamp, and then casts a Reflections of Lit Jara, naming Rogue. He then passes to me. Untap, play a Swamp, and then cast Authority of the Consuls, which on the stack makes a cat with a Johnny's Chosen. And then I will pass to Bilal. Bilal plays an island, and again passes, leaving his mana untapped. Sean, on his turn, plays an Evolving Wild, cracks it for a Plains, and then moves to combat, attacking Bilal with the High Priest of Penance, which is blocked by Raynar. And before the damage, Sean moves to sacrifice the Selfless Spirit, giving the High Priest of Penance indestructible and making sure that the damage done to it can destroy the Reflections of Lit Jara. In his second main phase, Sean casts a Children of Korlos, which enters tapped and gives me 1 life due to the Authority of the Consuls. Jason untaps. He'll draw a card and then move right to combat, attacking Sean for 6 with the Enigma Thief, and me for 2 with the Soaring Thought Thief. On the attack, we all mill 2 cards, and when it does damage, Jason will draw 2 cards and discard 1 card. In his second main phase, he'll play a Swamp, and then cast a Mind Crank. At the end of Jason's turn, I activate Gen's ability to sacrifice Authority of the Consuls and return Gravebreaker Lamia from the graveyard to the battlefield. This lets me search my library for Imminent Doom, put it into my graveyard, and as a note, I make a cat token here, but should not have, since the Johnny's Chosen says cast, and I'm going to be honest, this will happen a couple more times throughout the game. On my turn, though, I play an Exotic Orchard, and I move to combat, attacking Jason for 4 with Gravebreaker Lamia, gaining 4 life from lifelink. At the end of my turn, Bilal casts Generous Gift, targeting Mindcrank. Jason attempts to counter it with Drown in the Lock, In response, Sean sacrifices his doomed necromancer. This allows him to return Selfless Spirit and Remorseful Cleric to the battlefield. He then sacrifices the Remorseful Cleric to exile Balal's graveyard, fizzling the Drown in the Lock so that Generous Gift can resolve and destroy Mindcrank, making Jason a 3/3 elephant token. As long as the elephant token is on the board, it is represented by a Thopter token. Balal, still at the end of my turn, then casts Emergency Powers. With it on the stack, I activate Gen's ability to sacrifice the Gravebreaker Lamia and return Imminent Doom from my graveyard to the battlefield. With that ability on the stack, Sean then casts Mortify, targeting the Enigma Thief. Once that spell resolves, then Emergency Powers resolves, shuffling our hands and graveyards into our decks and each drawing 7 cards. On Balal's turn, he plays a Plains, foretells a card for free, making a spirit with Ranar, then casts Skull Clamp, and immediately equips the Skull Clamp to a spirit, killing it and drawing 2 cards. He then casts from exile a Raven form, targeting the Selfless Spirit, which Sean sacks in response to prevent it from being exiled. Balal then casts a Mother of Runes, as well as a Reconnaissance. He then moves to combat and attacks Sean for 3 using Ranar and a Spirit token. And in his second main phase, will equip Skullclamp to the Spirit token, killing it, drawing 2 more cards, and then foretelling another card and making another spirit with Ranar's ability. He then passes to Sean. Sean plays a Myriad Landscape and casts Drana the Last Blood Chief, immediately equipping it with Lightning Greaves. He moves to combat and attacks Balal for 4 with Drana, which triggers her ability to bring the Selfless Spirit back from the graveyard, and Balal blocks the attack with a Spirit token. In his second main phase, Sean re-equips the Lightning Greaves to Aura. On Jason's turn, he plays a River of Tears and moves to combat, attacking me for 1 with the Soaring Thought Thief. On the attack, we all mill 2, Jason draws 2, and discards 1. In his second main phase, he casts Cloak and Dagger. Then we see his commander hit the board as he casts Anawan the Ruin Thief. As he comes in, Cloak and Dagger immediately equips for free, since Anawan is a rogue, and he will pass to me. On my turn, I will untap, draw a card, play a Plains before casting Obosh the Prey Piercer. And then cast Beseech the Queen, which allows me to search my library for a card with CMC equal to or less than the amount of lands I control. I go and find a 1-drop so that I can start triggering Imminent Doom, and I find Authority of the Consuls, which allows me to trigger Imminent Doom when it is cast, doing 1 damage to Sean, which is doubled to 2 because of Obosh, and making another cat. On Bilal's turn, he plays a Sajiri Refuge, which gains him 1 life, and then he moves to equip the Skull Clamp to Ranar. After that, he casts a card from Foretell, which ends up being Sage of the Beyond. He then passes to Sean. Sean will untap and draw for his turn. Play a swamp, and then cast Grim Haruspex, as well as Remorseful Cleric. He then cracks his Myriad Landscape to go get 2 plains, and passes to Jason. Jason will untap and play a Choked Estuary, revealing a swamp from hand. He'll then move to combat, attacking me for 2 with Soaring Thought Thief. And on the attack, we all mill 2. When it does damage, Jason draws 2 cards, mills 1, and I mill an additional 2 thanks to Anawan's ability. In his second main phase, he will cast Demir Locket. And then he will foretell another card. He will also pay 1 to cast his previously foretold card Ravenform to target Sean's Selfless Spirit, which is sacrificed in response. On my turn, I play a swamp, and then I cast another Furnace of Wrath, triggering a Johnny's Chosen, making another cat, and this time the spell resolves. I also pay 2 for a Vampire Hex Mage, which triggers Imminent Doom to do 2 damage to Sean, which is doubled by Obosh to 4, which is doubled by Furnace of Wrath to 8. I then pass to Bilal. Bilal activates the Mother of Runes, giving Sage of the Beyond protection from black until end of turn. He then moves to combat and attacks Sean for 8 total damage with Ranar and the Sage. Drana blocks Ranar, which kills him since he's wearing the Skull Clamp, drawing Bilal 2 cards. As a note, Drana should have also died in this combat exchange thanks to Furnace of Wrath, but we don't catch that. And then Sean takes 10 damage as the Sage hits him for a double damage thanks to the Furnace. In his second main phase, Bilal casts Shatter the Sky, destroying all the creatures, and once everything is said and done, Sean's creatures return thanks to Aura, leaving him with a Children of Corliss, Selfless Spirit, Aura, and a Soul Warden. But Bilal casts a Wrath of God, and Sean sacrifices his Selfless Spirit to try to save his team. And Bilal then casts Draneth Magistrate. Sean untaps for his turn. He plays a Swamp, counts out his mana and weighs his options before deciding to switch the Lightning Greaves over to Aura, making sure he can protect his commander. He then casts Edgewalker, reducing all of his spells by black and white as long as they're clerics. He then also casts a Skyclave Cleric, gaining 2 life when it enters. And then he casts an Animate Dead, targeting Drana from the graveyard. He then attempts to cast Etchings of the Chosen with the intention of naming Cleric with it, but Jason counters it with a Drown in the Loch. With nothing else to do, Sean passes. At the end of the turn, Jason puts a counter on his Dreadship Reef and untaps. He then plays a Swamp, and taps 7 mana to cast a Diluvian Primordial. This allows him to cast the Beseech the Queen in my graveyard and Momentary Blink from Bilal's graveyard. He uses the Beseech to search his library for a card, and winds up putting Command the Dreadhorde into his hand. But in response to the Momentary Blink being cast, Sean casts Swords to Plowshares on the Diluvian Primordial. With the promise of a board wipe, Bilal uses Swan Song to counter the Swords to Plowshares, which allows Jason to blink his Diluvian Primordial and cast Wrath of God out of Bilal's graveyard. When the dust settles, Sean is left with Selfless Spirit, Soul Warden, Aura, and Edgewalker. On my turn, I cast a Final Parting, searching my library to put 1 card to hand and 1 card into the graveyard. I decide to put a Dictate of the Twin Gods into the graveyard and 1 card to hand. I then cast Grim Guardian, which triggers Imminent Doom, doing 3 damage, which is doubled to 6 to Sean. And I then foretell a card, now that the Draneth Magistrate is gone. Bilal untaps. plays a Port Town untapped, revealing an island from hand. He then casts a Mull Drifter, drawing 2 cards, and casts a Cloud Blazer, drawing 2 cards and gaining 2 life. With nothing else to do, Bilal passes to Sean. Sean untaps. And he casts a Soul's Attendant for free using Edgewalker. And then he will equip the Lightning Greaves to Aura and cast an Orzhov's Signet, as well as a Bishop of Rebirth and a Whisper Blood Liturgist. He then plays an Evolving Wilds, cracks it for a Plains, and he then passes to Jason. On Jason's turn, he plays an island, and he casts Command the Dreadhorde, paying 28 life into it. And once the spell resolves, he puts Shabraz the Sky Shark, Mother of Runes, High Priest of Penance, Remorseful Cleric, Drana the Last Blood Chief, Skyclave Cleric, Children of Corliss, Grim Haruspects, Obosh the Prey Piercer, and Soaring Thought Thief all onto the board. He then sacrifices the Children of Corliss to regain all of the life that he lost, and is able to draw a card from the Grim Haruspects. Also, as the Soaring Thought Thief enters, the Cloak and Dagger become attached to it. He then passes to me, and I untap, draw, and play a Mountain for turn. I then cast Showdown of the Scalds, which triggers Grim Guardian to make all my opponents lose 1 life, and triggers Imminent Doom to do 4 damage, which is doubled to 8 damage, to the Selfless Spirit in the hopes that Bilal can board wipe on his turn. Sean sacrifices the spirit in response, and brings back Children of Corliss with Aura's ability. When the Showdown of the Scalds enters the battlefield, I exile a Shatter the Sky, Power Conduit, Boros Signet, and a Plains. I then cast the Boros Signet and the Power Conduit. At the end of my turn, Bilal casts a Flicker Wisp and exiles the Authority of the Consuls so that it can return to the battlefield at his next end step. He then untaps and draws for turn. The first thing he does is cast a Skyclave Apparition to exile the Lightning Greaves on Sean's board. He then moves to combat and attacks Sean for 7 with his flying creatures, doing 14 thanks to the Furnace of Wrath. In his second main phase, he casts Time Wipe, targeting the Cloud Blazer to return to his hand. Unfortunately, though, Jason counters it with his Foretold card, Saw It Coming. Not to be deterred, Bilal then casts his Foretold card, Doomscar, finally destroying all the creatures on the board. Jason sacrifices the Remorseful Cleric to exile Sean's graveyard, draws 9 with Grim Haruspects, and thanks to Aura, Sean winds up with a board still full of creatures. At the end of his turn, Bilal casts Windfall, but Jason flashes a Notion Thief in response. And as a note, from here on out, as long as Notion Thief is on the board, anytime someone goes to draw a card, Jason is the one who will draw it as long as it's not the first card they draw each turn. And at the end of Bilal's turn, I get my authority back and move to Sean's turn. Sean, on his turn, casts Midnight Reaper, Not a great card draw engine with the Notion Thief on board. And then he moves to attack Jason with everything, doing 6 damage, which is doubled to 12 thanks to the Furnace of Wrath. In his second main phase, Sean sacrifices Aura to the High Market, which returns the Children of Corliss to the battlefield, and he then recasts Aura from the command zone. With nothing else to do, he passes to Jason. Jason untaps with his hand of 48 cards, thanks to the Windfall and the Notion Thief. The first thing that he does is play a command tower before moving in to cast the Mind Crank again. Soon after, he plays a Duskmantle Guildmage, which is thankfully tapped, and then casts Agadeem's Awakening for 5, returning Sir Conrad to the battlefield from the graveyard. With his remaining mana, he is able to activate the ability of Duskmantle Guildmage, making it so that anytime anyone takes damage, they mill over a card, and whenever anyone mills over a card, they take a damage. He then attacks Sean with Notion Thief to start the chain, and winds up killing everyone at the table, winning the game. Alright, so that was a heck of a game. So, honestly, that game lasted for about an hour and 48 minutes, and we were able to trim it down a little bit. But, all in all, I was pretty impressed with the way that Imminent Doom performed. With things like Obosh and Furnace of Wrath on the board, I actually did a lot more damage than I thought I was going to do. So it was very nice to see that all come together. And even though I wasn't able to win through the life gain that the clerics had, or, the many board wipes that Ranar had, it was an interesting ending to see all of the rogues come together and, with an 11 mana combo, be able to kill everybody at once. I don't think Imminent Doom could have competed with that. But this is a deck that I will probably play 1 or 2 more times, see how it does, and see if there's any more upgrades. I think my biggest recommendation, if you choose to play this yourself and give it a go, would be just to make sure that you're able to protect yourself a little bit. If it weren't for that Ajani's Chosen, I wouldn't have had that many creatures on the board, so if people were swinging at me pretty aggressively, I might not have been able to protect myself, so that might be something to consider. But it might also have just been a product of this one game. So if you are going to test it out, feel free. I put the deck link into the description of this video. And if anyone ever has any suggestions for future videos, please just let me know. I am planning on doing one of these videos once a week as I move forward with my deck creations. But thank you all for watching, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.